Economic society, Nigeria. Economic society, our voice is strong. Our vision is clear. We stand for progress. We stand for change. Our voice is strong. Our vision is clear. We stand for progress. We stand for change. Together we can make a difference.
Thank you very much. Please be kindly seated. This event, TED Fund, DBN, and other agencies here present, and of course the Central Bank of Nigeria. Former members of staff of these organizations to welcome. Private sector chief executives and stakeholders here present, we want to welcome you to this event. Staff of CC, we need to also acknowledge you specially. Please, a round of applause for them. Making this possible is not just only for the chief executive, but there are other lieutenants that are working with him to make this event possible. Civil society organizations and NGOs here present, welcome. Economists and students of economics here present too, because we're not just only talking to ourselves. I'm now a member of the NES though, even though I'm not an economist, but I also know that we have students of economics here in the room to learn from the best. Like they say, let the young grow. Gentlemen of the press, my community also, thank you for coming. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen here physically and online, please can we give a round of applause for those online too? Because we know there are a lot of people online. Professors online too, doctors online, because I can see that you're joining us here. So good morning everyone, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I am Nancy Naji. My 9-to-5 job, I don't know if it's 9 to 5, but I would say it's a 24-hour job, 24/7 job, is I'm the executive producer and anchor of Moneyline with Nancy on AIT, the foremost business program in the country. I thought you would give me a round of applause for that. On AIT channel 253. So it is my absolute pleasure to serve as your moderator for today's significant event, the unveiling of the Nigerian Economic Society 2025 Economic Outlook. I'm particularly happy to be here today. For these kind of occasions, I'm always happy. Why? Because this is an avenue for me to learn, to add to my knowledge bank. Someone very close to me says something that you have residual knowledge of everything, and is events like this, I always love speaking to, I can't count how many professors I've spoken to in my lifetime of doing this show, or doctors or experts. So I always love, coming to events like this, and even most importantly, moderating or anchoring, pricking from the brains of those that know best and adding to what I have. So it's so nice to be here today. I thought I would hear a round of applause for that. We shouldn't be tired yet, though. I need to see happy faces. So we are honored to have, such a distinguished assembly of expert policymakers in the room, and stakeholders are gathered here today. Your presence here definitely underscores the collective commitment we share towards advancing Nigeria's economy. So much has gone down in the last close to 2 years of this administration. I don't think we should just hash over it, but I know that we'll get into it in a bit. And a heartfelt thank you again to the Nigerian Economic Society for putting this together, for orchestrating this pivotal event. Please, a round of applause for them. And you know why? The Nigerian Economic Society has been in inception since 1957, if I'm not mistaken. Prof, am I right?
Right.
Yes. Yes, I'm correct. Yes, since 1957, when I was not born, this is my dad was, was alive then. So, but since then, NES has been a beacon of intellectual leadership, guiding our understanding and management, of course, of economic, social, and political transformations in Nigeria. So we will definitely, we're acknowledging you for that impact, and we pray that God will continue to, strengthen the NES to do that. It's an assemblage of many economists. In fact, when they admitted me to the society, I was like, Prof, I'm not an economist. He said, no, you are doing more than, you should be there. So I'm a member, and I really want to extend my sincere gratitude again. Like I mentioned, let's extend another sincere gratitude to CC, Center for the Study of Economics for Africa, for graciously hosting us in this esteemed facility. The AC is really cooling us. Our tempers will be mellowed down a bit and our brains will be working well. So thank you for making this event possible. Today's unveiling is particularly significant as we navigate the complexities of the recent economic reforms in Nigeria. Of course, we know that the 2025 economic report, which we will be seeing in a short while, offers a comprehensive assessment of the reforms, providing insights that are crucial for shaping policies and aimed at sustainable growth as well as development. I must say that the NES has done a fantastic job in terms of putting this report together. So as we delve into today's proceedings, I want to encourage us all to engage actively and make this day a day of insightful conversation as well as a day of insightful discussions, meaningful connections, of course, and perhaps, a bit of humor, because Nigerians have not been smiling in the last 2 years or so. I'm looking forward to what Dr. Ebeke will say at the panel, that we are taking this painful pill and we are not being given anesthesia as we are taking the painful injection. So let's see if we'll have a good room for a bit of laugh, but I don't know if that will happen. So now to formally commence our program, it is my honor to invite a distinguished scholar to deliver the welcome address. He is a renowned economist, of course, with a PhD from the University of Ibadan. He serves as a professor of economics at the same institution. And, he's the president of the NES, the Nigeria Economic Society. He was a former member of CBN's Monetary Policy Committee. Please, distinguished guests, with a round of applause as I invite on stage Professor Adeola Denikinju for the welcome remarks.
Thank you so very much, Nancy. Thank you so very much. Our distinguished member of the Nigerian Economic Society. Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. With great honor and immense pleasure, I welcome you all to this important gathering, the unveiling of the 2025 Economic Outlook for Nigeria. On behalf of the Nigerian Economic Society, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to each of you for taking the time to be here today. Our chairman of today and esteemed representatives from government, policymakers, captains of industry, financial experts, members of academia, development partners, and all stakeholders who have continued to shape Nigeria's economic landscape. Your collective expertise, dedication, and insights are invaluable as we seek to build a stronger and more resilient economy. Today's event is not just another economic discourse, but a call to action. As we unveil the 2025 Economic Outlook for Nigeria, we recognize the pressing need for a clear roadmap to navigate the complexities of our evolving economic landscape. The theme of this event, Navigating Reform Headwinds for Long-Term Growth and Sustainability, underscores the reality of our times. This is the second economic outlook that the Nigerian Economic Society will produce. The first economic outlook for 2024 was titled Between Adjustment Pains and Renewed Hope. The economic outlook which started under my administration as the president of the NES, provides an opportunity for Nigerian trained economists to contribute to the country's economic discourse. A unique feature of this year's report is the poll results on the assessment and outlook of the Nigerian economy in 2025 from 350 professional economists in academia and the public and private sectors of the economy. The past few years have been marked by profound economic challenges, global and domestic shocks, inflationary pressures, exchange rate volatility, fiscal constraints, and the far-reaching impacts of geopolitical uncertainties. While Nigeria has embarked on several bold economic reforms to foster stability and attract investment, the journey has not been without its challenges. Structural adjustments, subsidy reforms, monetary policy recalibrations, and initiatives to boost revenue have all encountered resistance and unintended consequences. Yet, we must persist, for the cause of inaction may be far greater than the discomfort of reform. The 2025 economic outlook we unveil today provides an in-depth analysis of the economic terrain ahead, equipping policymakers, businesses, and investors with the data-driven insights needed to make informed decisions. It highlights key opportunities, risks, and actionable recommendations to navigate the reform headwinds to ensure long-term growth, economic resilience, and sustainability. Economic transformation does not happen overnight. It requires consistency, policy coherence, and the right mix of strategies. Sustainable development can only be achieved when reforms are also people-centered. They are inclusive, and they are designed to strengthen critical sectors, such as agriculture, manufacturing, energy, technology, and finance. We must also prioritize human capital development, as no economy can thrive without investing in education, in health, care, and skills development. Furthermore, macroeconomic stability requires strong institutions, good governance, and an unwavering commitment to addressing corruptions and inefficiencies that impede growth. As a key driver of economic expansion, the private sector is also very critical and must be fully supported through an enabling economic environment, transparent regulations, and access to credit and infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, while reforms may be challenging, they present a unique opportunity for Nigerians to emerge stronger. The lessons from previous economic cycles should guide our approach as we implement forward-thinking policies that foster productivity, job creation, and shared prosperity. The Nigerian Economic Society remains committed to fostering dialogue, research, and policy recommendations that will help shape our nation's sustainable, inclusive, and prosperous economic future. This economic outlook is not just a document, but a strategic blueprint for informed public and private decision-making. As we unveil this report, I encourage the board's engagements, critical reflections, and collaborative solutions. Our shared goal should be to translate insights into action, policies into results, and reforms into lasting economic transformation. I also want to send this clear call to the government. It is not in the nation's interest to continue to ignore Nigeria's oldest professional association in the humanities in formulating economic policies and implementing the current economic reforms. The Nigerian Economic Society, established in 1957, is the umbrella for all trade economists in Nigeria. And you do not ignore your best, especially during a national economic emergency. Before I take my seat, I want to thank the Executive Director and Management of CC for providing this magnificent facility for this meeting free of charge. I think they must have looked into the pulse of the society. And then this poor society, well, let's just give them this place. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much, Dr. Shukoka Onyekwena. I'm grateful to the chairman of today's event, Dr. Shamsuddin Usman, FNES, CON, WFR, and former Minister of Finance, former Minister of Budget and Economic Planning, former President of the Society, for rescheduling another event to be here today. Thank you very much, sir. I must thank all the discussants for accepting our invitation despite a very short notice. Not the least, I'm grateful to Nancy Nanji, our compere and moderator. But for the next, and our love for next will be live on AIT now, on Morning Line with Nancy. So thank you that you are doing your Morning Line here with us today. I want to thank all our special guests that we invited who are here today, and those also who are online. Once again, I thank you all for being here today. I look forward to the insightful discussions that will follow and to a future where Nigeria stands resilient in the face of challenges while embracing the opportunities for growth and sustainability. Thank you and welcome.
Please make that applause louder for the president of the Nigerian Economic Society, because for Professor Adenikinju and his dedicated team at the NES, they've worked tirelessly, I must tell you, to ensure that today's report provides insightful, data-driven perspectives on Nigeria's economic trajectory. That report will be unveiling in a short while. They've done a fantastic job, I must tell you, and you will see why later. You know, I had an expo, though you understand, but you know, just before days ago. So please, a round of applause for them again. So without wasting any time at this point, it is my pleasure to invite our next speaker, a highly distinguished economist as well as a policymaker in the country. Our next speaker has held several positions in Nigeria's economic landscape, including former Minister of National Planning and former Minister of Finance. His career spans decades of public service, strategic economic planning, and financial governance. Please join me in welcoming the chairman of the occasion today, Dr. Samsudeen Usman, CON, OFR, fellow of the Unveils.
Our compeer and moderator, Nancy, has done an excellent job of the protocols and introductions. So all I will say is good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you've heard, the Nigerian Economic Society was founded in 1957, one of the oldest professional associations, if not the oldest. And it has been at the forefront of evidence-based policy advocacy. In the days of the super pump sex, nobody discussed any major economic policy initiative without the NES being in the room and on the table. So that's how significant the society is. My congratulations to Professor Abiola Adenikiju and the EXCO for several pioneering developments that they have achieved in their, under their administration. I was the president of the Nigerian Economic Society, as you've heard, in 1986. Nancy, I'm not sure if you were born then. And I thought I set some records. Professor you know, is there, and I'm sure he was around at that time. One of the records that I thought I set was, because I was working in the banking industry at the time, I was able to raise so much resources for the society that I actually left for the next administration. But this current administration is heading towards even beating that record. But also several other initiatives. What the event we are attending to today is one of them. The only thing is, I will say that there is one record that I set that I think you will find it difficult to beat. And that is the record of, it was during my administration that we extended tenure extension. The tenure of the president of the Nigerian Economic Society used to be 1 year. And we proposed that it should be 2 years, but made it clear that we ourselves were not going to be beneficiaries of that. So clearly, I think it is something that you are benefiting from now, because at least the president has a bit more time to get things done and to achieve. But this is not to actually retract or detract from the amount of initiatives and success that you have achieved. Congratulations. The 2025 economic outlook is another such record that this Professor Adin Kuju and his team have achieved. I really didn't want to discuss the issues, especially with this bright set of younger and more agile economists that we put together. I came to listen. I made just a few comments, but since I heard the president himself has gone deep into the issues, maybe I'll just say a few things. We are all familiar, obviously, with the prospects and the challenges, the key challenges, so I'm not going to even have to mention them. But I think it's been agreed by everybody that Nigeria is generally punching below its weight as far as economics is concerned. And for me, one of the confounding problems is really the issue of insecurity. Because without security, you really can't get anything done. And this is, people talk of corruption, and yes, all those things are, really, critical. But the insecurity that almost all over the country is really, you can't get any economic activity done properly if there is persistent insecurity. And okay, maybe I should just stop here. I had initially just thought I would mention 2 or 3 other issues, but I refused. In fact, some of the panelists were trying to pick my brains during the while we were waiting to start, and I said no. I came to listen to you, not the other way around. So maybe I wouldn't even say any of these things. And just say that it's my great honor and pleasure to be invited to chair this occasion. And again, congratulations to the President and Executive of the Nigerian Economic Society and all of you for honoring us with your presence. Thank you very much.
We will delve into the topic titled Navigating Reform Headwinds for Long-Term Growth and Sustainability in 2025 and beyond. But just before that, let me also quickly acknowledge that there are people online that have joined us too. While we were during that presentation, a few people that I know, I think we should also give a round of applause for Dr. Yila, former director at the DFD of Central Bank. He's joining us, he's also on this call with other professors that are joining us online. So we're not just talking to ourselves here. And I hope that even when the question and answers come up, I'd like to hear from those online to join us. So I want to quickly acknowledge you. Our first panelist is Dr. Hassan Mahmoud, a seasoned economist and central banker with over 30 years of public service expertise and experience. His expertise in monetary policy, exchange rate management, and financial sector reforms has been instrumental in shaping Nigeria's economic direction. He served as director of both the Trade and Exchange Department as well as the Monetary Policy Department at the Central Bank of Nigeria, leading pivotal policy shifts that influenced macroeconomic stability. Please welcome Dr. Hassan Mahmoud to the stage. Please make it louder. This is the cocoa of the matter. Next, we have Dr. Christian Ebeke, the International Monetary Fund's resident representative in Nigeria, with extensive experience in macroeconomic policy, fiscal governance, and economic development. Dr. Ebeke brings a global perspective on how Nigeria's reforms align with international economic trends. Please give him a warm welcome to the stage. Joining us next is a distinguished academic and financial economist, Professor Uche Owaleke. He's Nigeria's first professor of capital markets. Please, a round of applause for that. I remember my days at the stock exchange years ago. And is currently the director of Institute of Capital Market Studies at Nasarawa State University, a former commissioner of finance in Imo State with a wealth of experience in financial regulation and economic policy. He's also had a stint at the Securities and Exchange Commission. Professor Owaleke is a thought leader in Nigeria's financial sector. Please, another round of applause for him. Our next panelist is Dr. Chuka Onyekwana, the Executive Director at the Center for the Study of Economies of Africa. Of course, they've done a lot of work in terms of research and policy advisory in development economics as well as public finance. Thank you very much. Last but certainly not the least, we have Mr. Joshua Olufemi, a data-driven social entrepreneur and founder of DataFight. Please, a round of applause. Don't get tired. His work in economic data analysis and policy research is helping to drive transparency and informed decision-making in the country. He's also a National Endowment for Democracy Fellow and an alumnus of Oxford University Global Finance Technology Program. Joshua Olufemi there. Now that we have our esteemed panelists seated, don't forget that we will begin this much anticipated session. Our theme, navigating reforms headwind for long-term growth and sustainability in 2025 and beyond. It couldn't be more relevant, so I'm looking forward to what each panelist brings on the table. And let's also remind us that after this panel, for just about a few minutes, we'll be taking questions and answers right here in the room as well as online. Just before I take my seat, I think I will begin with, let me be a bit partial. I'll begin with Dr. Mahmood. Give me your own feedback, 1 minute, your own feedback of what the NES has said. We'll take it like that, then I'll come back to my question. So 1 minute reaction from all of you regarding this NES report, very quickly.
Okay, thank you very much. And I also stand on existing protocols and commend for giving us this well-researched forecast and analysis that's going to be useful for policy makers. I must also personally welcome my professor, who was my lecturer at undergraduate, Professor Oka Nzewe, and who was also my supervisor for my undergraduate. Thank you very much, sir. I'm one of the product. Now and also thank Dr. Shamsuddin, who was also my boss at the Central Bank, and every other person that were here, including my fellow directors, Dr. Ifobi. Now, on the outlook that has been brought out, I read through it, and thank you very much, Tope. Those are also my mentees. He did very well. Now, on the outlook, a few things I will just speak to since you gave me 1 minute. I think the analysis was also very clever and said it was a cautious optimism. And that's how economists do things, and they try to create some firewalls for themselves so that you cannot bring them down on what they've said. The underlying assumptions are also quite robust. The challenges and the constraints are well set out. So if you have deviations from the projections, the likelihood to come from those underlying assumptions. Two things I want to emphasize on the trajectory for inflation. Yes, the advanced economies are already seeing moderation, significant moderation actually in the last 2 years in terms of the inflationary pressures in those economies. And like Larry said, most of them are already going to their natural yield of 2%. But we are not seeing that in the emerging market economies due to some structural issues that have been announced, and also due to the expansionary trend that we've seen from the fiscal side. So the persistence of monetary tightening, I don't want to use the word, but it's also losing momentum in the sense that, the headwinds that are coming from the fiscal side and the global economy are also, making that impotence coming out. But the central bank is making some good adjustment in terms of how they moderate that. We don't know, there are no projections for monetary policy apart from tightening within 2025. On the side of the external sector and the build-up of the reserve, there was also, even though Dr. said that there were no projections for the reserve, but I'm sure the IMF and co will speak about that. We saw a lot of inflows in 2024. The parameters or the incentives and other measures that have been put in place are still very efficient. The IMTOs and all that the remittances are coming. My only fear from there is what's going on in the US now. There's a substantial part of those inflows are coming from the United States. What's going on in the US now? We pray that those that were sending those IMTOs to their relatives here are not those that have been deported. So if they are not, then we see that inflow still coming in. We still believe the foreign investors still have confidence in the economy given what the fiscal and monetary authorities are doing. We expect that flows to come in. I'm only worried about monetizing those inflows. If those inflows can come and go into infrastructure development, mechanized agriculture, manufacturing, healthcare, education, fine. But if they're going to come in and they're monetized and impact on the money supply we have within the economy, we see that firing back on our inflation numbers. Nancy, I think I will stop there to give others to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and thank you, NES, for inviting the IMF. I think the report was extremely comprehensive, and it also tells us about how busy 2024 has been in terms of policy implementation in Nigeria, with circulars flying all the way from the central bank almost every day. Last year, a new circular was put forward to address the specific issues, but also on the fiscal, we heard a lot about the tax reforms and how Nigeria should transform its tax system, but also any other initiatives on the oil and gas sector to incentivize more investment, including from the PIA angle. So a busy year, and the report talks about it, and that's why it was quite dense. It also tells us that it's going to be very difficult to disentangle exactly when the turning point is going to be, especially because of the lag of some of these reforms, right? Monetary policy takes some lags before it impacts aggregate demand. Fiscal policy has usually a shorter lag, but implementation lag takes more time. So very, very complicated landscape for economists. That's why I think the mantra is we are all cautiously optimistic about the future. Something that the report, maybe I misread it or I didn't pay enough attention, but I would have hoped that the presentation talks a lot also about how to buffer the impact of this reform on the population and what is really the stance of NES. Right? There is a debate in Nigeria whether the direct payment to households is something that should be done. Some people believe that no, you have to strengthen community instead of giving cash to people. I would have really hoped to hear from Nigerian economists on that particular huge debate. We all understand that this reform has distributional consequences, but how to buffer the impact on the most vulnerable? What is the best way we should be doing this, right? And some organization has been criticized for pushing the agenda towards cash transfer. So what is the average position of NES? I would just conclude on when the reform were implemented by the administration, it was based on a certain landscape globally, right? So we knew what the world economy is going to be, and there were some assumptions about growth and exchange rate, but also interest rate movement, financial condition globally. Now the reality is different, right? And so the landscape when the reform were implemented is no longer the landscape when the reform are going to impact the economy. So we are in a completely different world. You can see how, foreign aid, the landscape is being shifted. You can see how global economic fragmentation is now coming back again as a key topic. So when we were expecting the reform to start giving us tremendous impact and positive impact on the economy, now we are faced with a new reality, which is external demand and the global uncertainty that we all face. So how agile will Nigerian authorities be in 2025 to make sure that this new reality is built in their contingency plan?
Thank you so much. Yeah, the chairman, the president, permit me to adopt protocols already established. Let me also start by commending the NES for the report. I think I agree that it's comprehensive. I've seen a number of reports on the economic outlook for 2025. I think this one is it. By way of recommendation, and I'll speak to other issues when I get my turn. I think the report is heavy on the FG. Okay, most of the things there revolve around the FG. There is very little on subnationals, and of course you know that you can't talk about macroeconomic stability without the role of the subnationals. Today we all know that part of the worry that the central bank has to do with fiscal surprises. The fact that the reforms have led to a number of subnationals now having more money than they used to have. And each time the central bank worries about money supply, the subnationals contribute because of the much they are getting. So I was expecting to also see issues that also address subnationals in that report. The other one too has to do with the recommendations. Many of them I see as general. I would want to see going forward that some of the recommendations are specific. For example, when you say, if you look at that report, the recurring theme there, because I read it, has to do with enhancing monetary and fiscal policy coordination. I saw that in many of the paragraphs, but there wasn't any specific recommendation with regard to that coordination. Okay, which is where I also think there was something. We tried to put in the amended CBN Act, which the IMF, didn't quite like. But that's to the effect that there's need to have a committee, okay, or a council, Monetary and Fiscal Policy Coordinating Council, that will serve as a coordinating unit, okay, without prejudice to the independence of the central bank. Okay, we have it in other clients. You have a coordinating committee, for example. In Egypt, you have that kind of thing that's chaired by the Prime Minister. So in Nigeria, for example, we could have it chaired by the Vice President, who is the chairman of the Economic Council. So you have in that committee the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Budget and National Planning, the Central Bank Governor, okay, the Minister of Trade and Industry. Okay, so we have that kind of council that will sit together and address macroeconomic issues holistically, because it's one economy. So that when the central bank is talking about monetary policy, money supply, it also finds the fiscal side also discussing these things holistically. And in line with that, so you now begin to say that the central bank will be having a target for GDP growth rate, for example. In 2025, the central bank's GDP growth target is different from what we have in by the fiscal side. Okay, so it's one economy, and I repeat, the target should be the same, even in terms of inflation. The central bank should be able to provide the inflation target that the fiscal side should use, and not the other way around. So I'm saying, if we say there should be proper coordination, then we should have actionable, steps to get around it. So those are my recommendations. Thank you.
Yeah, good day, everyone. Let me start by thanking the NES for this comprehensive, clear, and insightful report. It touched on global aspects, regional, and as well as national economic issues. But I'll just follow Mahmoud by touching on this issue of conscious optimism. Yeah, I wonder why there's cautious optimism following the fact that most of the macroeconomic indicators for last year, either underperformed or deteriorated. We follow these trends on a weekly basis, and it has overall not been quite impressive. There are just a few that have improved, and those ones are trade surplus and the accumulation of forex reserves. But what are the drivers of these improvements? What are we trading? Did we start trading in cars or manufactured goods or anything? Or did we just benefit from an increase in oil prices or the production? And the same with forex reserves. Is it tied to oil? Oil prices and quantity. So where is the optimism coming from? That's my question. And then you mentioned that there's the risk of an oil glut, which will reduce this prices. So if there is a risk of oil glut, which is the only source of a positive news. Where is the optimism coming from? And if that happens, we know that we are headed for a recession. That's all our recent recessions have been driven by oil prices. So I just wonder why there's a cautious optimism. And then what I didn't see much is the fact that a lot of what is going on was triggered by the reforms, the two reforms, removal of subsidies and exchange rate simplification. I thought I would see some more information about the cushioning effect mechanisms. How is Nigeria trying to reduce the effects of these huge inflationary pressures, which is affecting goods and other inputs? So those are my issues.
I guess everyone would appreciate that 5 doctors, professors are talking, and I'm not even sure if they count my masters as one of this interesting. I would just, right on all that they've said and just add 1 or 2 things. I guess the important thing is we weren't seeing the numbers that were driving those indicators for either optimism or the caution. The other is, I was expecting to see the non-oil subsector outlook. What would be the things that would drive the change, whether leaving it flat or taking it northward? What would they be? Would it be the telecoms? Would it be the blue economy? Would it be IT? If you had a lot of optimism in 2024 before Trump, that the digital economy was going to be one great driver for. But with this, we don't know if we're even going to get those technology investments anymore. So those kind of key subsector insight, of course, aside the fact that the 36 subnational states, what is happening at those levels? What are we doing with those figures? I think it was important. I was also expecting to see, fantastic. I love the modest. I think what was cautious is really the pessimism, not the optimism. If you like, I guess we're already seeing a lot of those socio-political, drivers of the outlook that we're looking at. What is the LG autonomy going to mean? Less money at the federal and at the state, and now going to the local government. What would that mean? We still don't have a census, so what are we using to drive the per capita? Of all the GDP figures, what do these things mean? And then maybe a little bit of spice on the macroeconomic issues, the markets in Canada. Now we have the real here and there. What would that mean for trade, and how would that drive? And little or less of the interconnections of all of these regional, global, shift with Trump, or if you like, call it the US, going the direction they're going. What does it mean for BRICS, like you were trying to point to? Would it mean more inflow from there? And what would that inflow mean? Would it be constructive? Would it be corrosive? Capital inflow to sort of balance? And what would that mean even post 2025, or things that I thought we could embellish? But I guess we can leave that for also policy, research, communication, actors in the room and outside of the room to help us sort of look at the numbers in there. But great work. I can't say a lot because both the president and the presenter are also leaders, of our own editorial advisory council, and I know that a lot of caution, which we've also learned from, went into this. But all the same, I think we need to really call a spade with those socio-political issues in country and regionally. You just had the AES exit. What does that mean? You've spoken about what is happening to Ethiopia, spoken about what is happening. That's another agri-driven block. What does that mean for Nigeria's own investment into conditional cash transfer, as was mentioned? Some of those linkages I thought could happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, a round of applause for our panelists. And if you have 10 economists in the room, they look at one issue from different sides. So my 5 panelists have been able to look at this report and dissect it. So I think I will anchor, I will begin to anchor from this level. So many things. In fact, I'm even thinking that the questions you have now have been turned over, but I will not want to, to distort where we are. But I think I'll begin again with Dr. Mahmood, where Joshua ended in terms of the twin policies of, fuel, there's petrol subsidy removal, as well as the devaluation of the Naira that has led to the decline of the Naira in the last few months. We've seen that the Central Bank of Nigeria has been, struggling to maintain the value of the Naira. So Nigeria's energy sector reforms, particularly subsidy removal and transition efforts, have been facing also resistance, due to affordability concerns and some of the other concerns that we know. How can the government, and I'm talking about the FG now, I hope that during the question and answer we'll be able to look at the state's contribution to the fiscal surprises like Professor Waleke Pore. How can the federal government now balance short-term socio-economic pains with long-term energy sustainability while ensuring that the reforms do not stall? I assume that Dr. Beke and his colleagues just across the streets in Washington, the World Bank, would not want these economic reforms to stall. But how do you expect the government to balance this? And let me just add this very quickly, Dr. Mahmood. I think it was Joshua that mentioned it, or was it Dr. Chuka, that our country is heavily dependent on oil. So that means anything that happens now, we could go back, into problems again. What structural energy policy shifts, and I'm asking you this also as the president of NAWA, energy policy shifts are essential to ensure Nigeria's long-term fiscal stability, and how these reforms withstand global economic shocks with Trumponomics now happening around the world. Tokpe actually said earlier, there is a Republican in his presentation, Republican government in the US. It's not Republican, it's Trump. So with Trumponomics now, how do we, withstand these global economic shocks? I hope they're not too much for you, but I know you can.
Thank you, Nancy. When you were asking the question, I was counting. When I got to 6, I just stopped counting. I said I'll listen to the last one, and I'll start from the last one. But thank you very much. I think they are all well connected, but I will just try to focus on 2 sides of the question. One, the policy reform, the subsidy removal, and the backlash of that, the socio-economic resistance that is coming from that through the hardship and all that, which is compounded by the tax reforms and all other reforms that are also impacting on the individuals, firms, and businesses, and also sustaining this reform, particularly in the energy sector, to be able to consistently improve on energy supply, or what we call energy security, which the report also said is extremely important for us to enable growth and also establish macroeconomic stability. One, the subsidy removal is done. I don't want to lament on whether the process, whether it's supposed to be gradual, to lump sum, whatever, that is gone. So let's deal with the realities now. The realities now are the fact that the pullback that we got from the subsidy removal, how is it implemented to provide cushion for this hardship that we are seeing? In every policy reforms in economics, we have what we call economic stabilizers. These stabilizers are supposed to provide the short-term absorbing, stress-absorbing mechanism, such that those they are making those reforms for are able to, one, understand that reform, see along through with the reform, because it's a two-side equation. While we expect the consumers, the individual, the business to also behave in a particular way. If the reform is impacting on them too negatively for too long, and you start seeing some resistance, and you don't get the reciprocal behavior that you get, because those reforms are supposed to anchor expectations, a kind of behavior from those group investors, businesses, households, firms, the vulnerable, and all that. So we see a lot of noise, not noise now, with due respect to all Nigerians, a lot of concern around the impact of this reform, particularly subsidy. So what should the government, for what to go, and for even though I'm still an alumni of Central Bank, when we say government, we say both federal and subnational. So we mean both, everybody, including local government. So from the government side, dealing with this socio-economic backlash from the hardship that comes from the reform, particularly subsidy removal, is one critical thing, Nancy, is that communication is very key. We said communication is one of the policy tools for monetary policy. It's also a major policy tool for the fiscal. So communication is very key. There's no arrogance in it. We should be able to let the receivers at the other end of the equation to understand where we're going there, how we're going to get there, the transparency in that. So the expectation is that yes, we're feeling the pain now, but they say there's light at the end of the tunnel. But that's when there's a tunnel. So there's a tunnel, there's a hole. When the end of the hole is black, but the tunnel is there. So you should be able to decide that yes, there's really a tunnel, that you see light at the end of it. So there should be that understanding. It's not that even if people are illiterate or people are in the rural area, there's also a channel of communication with that. So that communication is very, very key to get that positive feedback from that group. Number two, there needs to be transparency in the deployment of the gains of the subsidy removal, if there is any. And that should go into providing other public utilities that will cushion the effect on the populace. The free ride utilities, which include like education, like health, like creating employment. The recent rep of the IMF mentioned this conditional cash transfer. So we have a major concern with that in terms of the implementation. If you're going to be distributing, I don't know how much it used to be, about 70, 80 billion to maybe 200 million people, not using technology, doing that physical, using boats in Bayelsa, flying, using camel somewhere or donkey somewhere, that is not going to work. There's a need for the fiscal authorities to also go. We have a Ministry of Communication and Digital Economy or something like that. We need to adopt technology such that those conditional cash transfers can go to people's phone, and you can use those phones and make transactions. Nobody goes to market now. Even those that are selling tomatoes now, you can also do USSD transfers to them. There are people holding POSs in different places so if there's transparency in the deployment of the gains of the subsidy to improve people's life and create jobs for them, that will substantially enable that positive feedback. So that's what's important. So those gains should go into those sectors so that we said we're removing subsidy because the subsidy was supposed to go to the poor, but it later went to maybe 5% of the elites. But now the suffering is more to the poor when you are removing it. And this elite are still doing very well. So there's need to rebalance that equation such that the gains now of removed subsidy will go to this vulnerable group of people in a very transparent way. And when they see those positive outcomes, they'll be able to believe in what you're doing and also cooperate with you to be able to achieve or sustain those reforms. On the other side of the thing, in terms of sustaining this reform for energy efficiency, energy security, that is important for driving growth and macroeconomic stability. It's very difficult, is it the IMF or the World Bank that said that we need to endure this for the next 15 years. I don't think 15 years I'll be about 75 years old, so I would not even want I don't want to wait that long before I start seeing some.
We will move towards a higher growth regime for Nigeria. I think that Nigeria needs stability, but with a higher growth ambition. So what is the type then of stabilization mechanism you have to put in place so that when the economy gets back to its feet, the sectors that are the most productive will be the first to enjoy the new regime, right? So stabilization, for the sake of stabilization, you will end in a low growth and low inflation, right? Imagine even if we get to 15%, You can get to 15% inflation, but still growth at 0.5 or 1% of per capita income, right? GDP per capita 1%. This is still too low for Nigeria. So what is then the framework we need to put in place on the supply side so that when stability is finally reached this year, the prospect for 2026 onwards are really, really on the optimistic side, especially on the supply side. That's why priority sectors, Nancy, such as agriculture. You know, in many African countries, agriculture is not a sexy sector enough, despite the huge general equilibrium impact that it has. You know, Dr. Mahmoud was at the CBN. Agriculture impacts food inflation, which impacts monetary policy. Agriculture impacts export, which impacts FX reserves. Agriculture impacts job creation, which impacts security. Agriculture is really one of the key sectors with all the potential general equilibrium effect you can think of. Then you have power, you have security, you have manufacturing sectors. What is the roadmap and what is the strategy right now that is being put in place so that after stability, quickly we move swiftly into a new growth regime for Nigeria in the area of 6 to 7%? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Obeke. You said a lot of things, and what came to my mind when you were talking about strengthening fiscal space that we've seen even for the FG and more so even the states, which Professor Waleke explained earlier. The states are even still complaining that even though they have more revenue, I don't know if you've been told, but I've been told by some state governors, the inflation is eating into our money. Yeah, so states are getting more monies, but the governors are now giving excuses for not doing what we expected them to do because, according to them, inflation. So that begs the question which you're asking, how do you now do, that governance framework you're talking about, if you're looking for perhaps less inflation, how much would it impact growth? And we also know that the states are also part of growth drivers. But so many things to think about in this panel. But I think I'll go over to Professor Waleke. And Dr. Manuel mentioned earlier capital markets. I think it lost on it, a bit. And I know, of course, as the first professor of capital markets in the country, how can Nigeria deepen its capital market to absorb the shocks of ongoing economic reforms while sustaining growth? And let me just also add this to it as an addendum. Given the current monetary tightening that we've seen from the Central Bank of Nigeria, I know that anytime that Cardoso and he still increases monetary rate, you're always screaming somewhere, high borrowing costs and as well as high exchange rate volatility. How can the capital markets in Nigeria be repositioned to attract long-term domestic and foreign investment without destabilizing macroeconomic fundamentals? And I also need to put in here the anticipation of the NBS rebasing of the GDP and CPI, and to see how, if that will have any impact at all. So over to you, Prof.
Thank you so much, Nancy, for those questions. Two major questions. The first one is talking about how we can deepen the capital market, right? Okay. So when you talk about debt, capital market debt, what comes to mind is liquidity. Okay, capital market debt is all about ensuring that the capital market has liquidity. And for the capital market to have liquidity, there must be large number of, buyers and sellers. Just like what we read in a perfect market, you need to have large number of buyers and sellers such that no one player can influence, the price, the prices. And then how do you have a large number of buyers and sellers? How do you have large number of issuers and investors? Okay, the sellers and the buyers. Let me even start with the issuers. The issuers too speaks to the number of listings that we have in the market. Today in Nigeria, we have about 151 companies that are listed on the main bourse. The main bourse is the Nigerian exchange. In South Africa, we have 274 companies that are listed on the Johannesburg Securities Exchange. Over here 151. But it's not just about listing. Our own companies that are listed here, the nature of the listing is such that has what we call concentration risk. Concentration risk in the sense that if you remove the first 10 companies, the market cap will collapse. If you remove the likes of Dangote Cement, remove the likes of Boa Cement, MTN, Geregu, and a number of others, the market cap will just go. Today, the market cap is around, equities market cap is around 65 trillion. And just 10%, 10 out of 151, accounting for about 60% of the market cap. So that's concentration risk. Okay, so one way we can deepen the market, therefore, is to, on the side of the issuer, is to attract more companies to list on the members. And one specific recommendation I want to give in this direction is for the government to use incentives, particularly fiscal incentives, to be able to attract companies to list. I happen to chair the subcommittee on presidential fiscal committee on tax reforms, fiscal policy and tax reforms. I chair the subcommittee on the capital market, and that, if you check our report, you also find these recommendations. The one that is out there now is the one on tax, the tax bills. But that committee has also made, a whole range of recommendations to do with fiscal policy. It's not just about tax. We have done recommendations with respect to spending, government budgeting, and also, how to revive the capital market, or boost the capital market. It's not just about tax. So one of the things you will find there, which my subcommittee recommended, is the issue of use incentives to boost activities in the capital market. A good example for it is to use civil tax. Today, large companies in Nigeria pay 30% tax. Okay, so, and the recommendation you find even in the tax bill is such that the company's income, tax rate for large companies will be reduced, if you like, progressively, from 30% to 25% by the year 2030. Okay, so there's a plan to, it's one of the things we put in that recommendation. Of course, after the meeting we had with the governors forum, the governor said, they wouldn't want that tax rate should be left at, 30%. But in this direction, for example, you could say, let listed companies pay lower tax. If you're listed, you can pay 28% tax, for example, while other companies pay 30%. So that can serve as an incentive for companies to list. You can also give companies tax breaks, okay, or tax waiver. In their first year or first 2 years of listing, you ask them not to pay tax. In Jamaica, if you look at the typical Jamaica case, in Jamaica, they granted tax breaks for companies to list on their exchange. At that time, they had just 5 companies that were listed on the Jamaican Stock Exchange. When they had that, policy, okay, the number of companies moved from 35 to 100 because a number of them wanted to come and enjoy the tax waiver. Once you list, you don't pay tax for some years. So we can also do that kind of use that kind of incentive to incentivize companies to list on the market. So that is on the issuer side. On the side of the investors, it's important to have a balanced mix of investors in the market. Of course, by investors, we are not only talking about institutional investors, the pension funds, insurance companies, we're also talking about retail investors. The retail investor base today in Nigeria is still shallow, given our size, given our population. And one way we can boost retail investor base in the country is through this capital market literacy, financial market literacy. Even among economists, okay, how much of the capital market do we know? And that is why part of what needs to happen is for this financial market education, to also be included in the curriculum of higher institutions. So before you finish, you are expected to take courses in financial markets, capital market. That will also help to grow the awareness of capital markets and activities. And finally, the issue of regulation. It's important that capital market regulation is firm, so that investors can feel protected. And it's only when they have confidence in the market that they can come and invest. So what do we do to deepen? I've talked about on the issuer side, we use incentives to bring them to the market. And on the side of investors, financial literacy and regulation. But let me also say this, when we say capital market, it's not just about the exchange. It's not just about, the exchange is simply the platform, okay? Capital market is about long-term funds, okay? The market for long-term funds, which is why I want to commend what the government has just done. The recent increase in the budget 2025 budget by 4.5 trillion. Much of it is going to recapitalize the Bank of Agriculture and the Bank of Industry. So what that will do is to position them, give in a position to now lend, do long-term lending for development purposes. So that's what capital market is all about. Strengthening our development finance institutions to be able to perform their functions. Especially now that the central bank is withdrawing from those interventions. So I think that's important. Then on the issue of how do we also attract foreign investments via the capital markets. Again, that also speaks to the breadth of the market. When you talk about breadth, one of the things you're also looking at is the diversity, the variety of the products we have in the market. Okay, in the market today, traditionally we still have shares and bonds, and the good thing is that we also have exchange traded funds and even derivatives. I was one of those that also worked to introduce derivatives in our market, and today we have derivatives in our market. So we have these products there now, but it's also important that we put in place an environment where foreign investors would also want to come in, not only to bring in hot money, foreign portfolio investments, but also bring in the one that will last. And that is where macroeconomic stability is very critical. That's also where coordination between fiscal and monetary policies is very critical. Finally, on this coordination and macroeconomic stability, again, I want to come back to my specific recommendation, which is what I want captured, that there is need for us to have a fiscal and monetary policy coordinating council chaired by the vice president. Membership will just be 4 people, the Minister of Trade, Minister of Finance, Minister of Budget, and the CBN governor. Then that council will be assisted by an economic intelligence unit, a technical team that will comprise the president of NES as the chairperson. You have the directors of research, central bank, NMPC, Statistical General of the Federation, and a number of them. So these recommendations are there. If you have an economic think tank, like an intelligence unit, supporting the council itself that takes the decision, I think coordination will be enhanced. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Prof, let me take it from, because at least I think I have perhaps residual knowledge again, because you're talking about this coordination. I think there's something like that, but perhaps they haven't met in a long time. The Monetary and Fiscal Coordination Committee, I think they called, perhaps in 2004. Yes, it has been in existence since 2004. It's still there. Yes, but I don't know when last they met. Yes, Monetary and Fiscal Coordination Committee. I think that's what they call it. Yeah.
Of course, these issues came up even in our committee, the Presidential Fiscal Committee. We talked about it, and it was also said that this committee, has been there. But look at the composition of that committee. It is different from what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the one that would involve is the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Trade, and Minister for Budget, and the central bank governor, chaired by the Vice President. At that level, the one you're talking about will have, if you check it, it has maybe the DMO exactly. That's not what I'm talking about. DMO, Statistical General, and various will come under the intelligence unit, the technical team that will support that decision-making body, which is the council.
So since we have something like that, would you canvass for strengthening it, or should we now create something else? Instead of jettisoning the baby and the bathwater, that's something we should just. It's not. I'm just asking a question. But I think we would go over to Dr. Onyekwana and. President Ness, I hope you're taking note of of what we're saying, and perhaps even as we end, you could have responses to some of the things that have been said here, or even Dr. Lanyon. So, Dr. Onyekwana, let me take you up on so much has been said about unintended consequences of the structural reforms. How do we, look at these reforms moving forward, especially this year, so that Nigerians see that perhaps they're economically sound, though a lot of people believe they are not economically sound or they are not people-oriented, and socially equitable for long-term sustainability. I think it was Dr. Baker or Dr. Mahmoud that mentioned, it's like 5%, when you're talking about I think is it the reforms or so, that a few people are getting the largesse from this reform. So how do we make it as socially equitable for long-term sustainability? And let me also mention this. I think it was Joshua that talked about non-oil outlook earlier on, which was not captured here. What pragmatic policies and institutional reforms must be implemented to ensure that there's a shift from resource-dependent economy to a productivity-driven economy? As someone that looks at the economy from my vantage point every day, I see in Nigeria that there is a decline in productivity. Even our employment for our labor workforce now is really declining, and we've not even started a productivity conversation. So how do we ensure a productivity-driven economic model that makes us have long-term prosperity?
Okay, so there are two questions there. Let me take them one by one. I'll start with the one about structural reforms and the unintended consequences. I'll start by questioning the question. When you say unintended consequences, right? So you have a country that fuel prices constitutes a huge cost for households and firms because transportation cost is key, but also fuel comprises energy provision. And you move the cost, you have a policy that moves the cost from 197 to 1,000. And then you have an import-dependent country, and you try to stabilize the exchange rate, good, but you now stabilizes at twice its value to the dollar. It's not rocket science that will lead to inflation. It's not only, it's not like unintended. The uncertainty is not the uncertainty is not huge. It's quite certain. If you have done a pre-assessment of the impact of such removal on sectors, it will be clear that it will be highly inflationary. So now we have gone into, heightened inflation, hardship, poverty increasing, cost of living crisis. So it points to the need for evidence-driven structural reforms. There are countries like Mr. Rebecca mentioned that subsidy removal is, it increases the fiscal space and allows you to invest in other sectors, but we need to, put things in context. Nigeria, if you put that kind of shock, it has very huge implications on poverty. And the hardship should have, the policy should have come with a complementary alternative to cushion the effect on the vulnerable population. Some countries actually start the cushioning effect before the removal of the subsidy. In some cases, it is gradual, gradual and phased, whereby you remove part of it and then you cushion the effect, and then before you try the other. But in the Nigeria case, it was abrupt. The communication was not effective. The stakeholder engagement for it was not robust. But all we just heard was that there's a war of subsidy and it has triggered, huge problems. So what do we now do? The government needs to find a way to cushion the effect of these huge inflationary pressures. Cash transfers might not be the answer to Nigeria's problem. It might actually be inflationary, to understand. But a sector-specific policy, such as agricultural intervention that will reduce the food prices. Food inflation, that will tame the food inflation, could be a way of reducing the impact of inflation on the vulnerable. And also there is also need evidence to also show how does the removal of subsidy, which has increased revenue from 1.1 trillion to 1.7, or is it 2? Exactly. So how has that transited to more investment social sectors, education, health, and even sectors that will help to cushion this effect. These are the kind of publications that you expect from the government, which is it might be there, but not as robust enough. And then you're talking about productivity, economic diversification. Okay, so in my life, economic diversification has been a topic right from my school days, Nigeria economic diversification. We know what to do about economic diversification, but it has not been done. To diversify your economy, you need to invest in infrastructure. You need to invest in infrastructure so that key sectors like manufacturing and agriculture, transportation, logistics, energy sector. These are the sectors that you need to empower in order to industrialize. You also need an educated workforce, so that they'll be able to harness the skill sets within the country. You also need effective trade policies, investment policies. The African Continental Free Trade Area is an opportunity to harness regional value chains. So these, I must say, I've said this 1 million times, these are the ways to harness to achieve economic diversification.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Mr. Olufemi, we've been talking about structural reforms, policy adjustments, and all of that, social intervention or cash transfer. What comes to my mind is data to support it, credible as well as transparent data. At a time we were questioning our social register, as it were. How many people, do we even know how many people are poor in Nigeria? There's a NASCO office, social safety office. How many people are poor? These interventions, the Minister of Finance, when I spoke with him on my show some time ago, he said, Nancy, we are giving 25,000 naira each to the poor people. But the question is, where are the poor people? So that brings to the question of data integrity, and with the rapid digital transformation we're seeing, Dr. Mahmoud was the one that said earlier, you can actually send money to someone with star something, USSD code. So how do we use rapid data as well as digital transformation? And I'm bringing in artificial intelligence here, because we're in an artificial intelligence age. This week, or was it last week? I think this week. Yesterday and 2 days ago, we've seen the tussle between Elon Musk and Sam Altman of OpenAI. So if the world is going this way, we also going the way the world is going in terms of using it for economic decision making. So that's my question for you. How do we use this to drive informed, accountable, and sustainable economic reforms? Then I also need to ask you this question, which is what role, because Dr. Mahmoud mentioned earlier on, and even Dr. Becker, the role of communication. What role should media and civil society, media my space, civil society space, which perhaps also Dr. Nyekwana plays in somehow, in holding policymakers accountable for reform implementation? So those are the two questions for you.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to see how practical we could go with this. When you talk about data integrity, and I'm going to borrow from what the last speaker just mentioned, which is infrastructure. So what's infrastructure driving our data collection, data management, or data-driven decision making, right? And I'm saying that to say, even if you were going to collect the data, what is the digital public infrastructure that we have that is going to help with the coordination? If you wanted to deploy AI into anything, I've been seeing a lot of narrative about AI. The Ministry of Communication and Digital Economy is speaking about, and I mean, there are policies in the right directions. The question is what we've said about governance and efficiency. And why am I saying this? If we wanted a stability and growth direction, that means we probably want to pick on 2-3 sectors. Then the question is, what data do we have for those sectors? How do we collect that data? Who owns that data? You're talking about fiscal. He was talking about fiscal and monetary policy alignment. My question is the data even aligning? Let's start with the data. The DMO will give you a different figure about the debt, because when you go into your FES, MTSS document, you find a different figure. So even data alignment, I think, is where to start. So you can't talk about data integrity where your coordination is not built on, like coordinated infrastructure to drive that. We all know what happened to MBS, platform a while ago. I don't think that that's how you want to even start, to resource, data collection or data provision in the first place. The second thing is how I see that the use of data by government data for decision making seems to be very linear and, narrow. If you're putting your stabilization gain or whatever policy gain into conditional cash transfer, what informed that has been what is important. Farmers have continued to, have post-harvest losses. You're giving them more money to go and produce more of what they're going to lose because they can't move it from farm gate to market. So should you be putting money into that structure or putting money into people's hands to buy more?
What's your problem? Line of people.
Okay.
I'm waiting before
right.
We're talking and before everything.
We're talking about youth productivity. We're not even talking about the intersectionality of that youth productivity. How many percentage of Nigerian youth are, within the digital economy in the first place? Is that where we want to go? It's not enough. It's not enough to have that technology, capacity. It is not enough for you to put a lot of money. I've seen a lot of international people put money into technology, and the question is, which sector are they deploying this technology into? We can't even connect the technology innovation that Nigeria has been making. We've had a lot of fintech companies in Nigeria, unicorns in Nigeria, but just finance. Nothing is happening in the culture sector, nothing is happening in energy and technology sector. Nothing is happening in those sectors that, if we go back to our sub-sector GDP figures, when you look at it, you see that you don't have the connection between that technology innovation and those sector growth that we're really looking for. I guess those are the things that are more important than if you build the infrastructure, but you're not doing multi-stakeholder conversation around it. And you're speaking about policy, and I think Dr. Mahmoud did a very good job when he spoke about policy communication. And that's how I'll probably connect back to what the civil society and the media should do. First thing is, who's communicating to who? Right? The head of the tax and fiscal policy reform practically was the only one talking to the policy on LinkedIn. He was, who pays anyway? Who pays? NTA. Who pays? Come on. Help me explain it. Help me break it down. You have the network of the Nigerian television network. The same thing with radio. You're not doing the local language, interpretation of what these taxes will mean. And what people are calling information exploiters are turning it around to disinform, and people are not getting the right information. So you can't get civil society or the media to communicate anything if you are not even giving them the information in the first place, right? I guess that's one way to look at it. But to also then take it from how the civil society and the media should do its job. I guess the first thing is accountability about data transparency itself. If you don't have the data about social register, if you don't know, just give us even the metadata. Just give us the map, right? Geolocation map of where the people you are going to give the money to are. We don't want to know their names. Of course, that's privacy or personal data. But let's know that it is 10% in Lagos State, 5% in Ekiti State. Oh, how does it layer back on internal generated revenue, federal allocation committee or revenue distribution? Those simple data, I think that civil society needs to continue to demand. And at the level of governance and government tolerance, I think it's another thing. I don't know how many journalists. It's a sector that you sort of see me within the media, the data research. How many journalists really want to see anything again? You send the FOI for the Bureau of Public Procurement to tell you how much was spent on a real contract, and then that is called cyber stalking, and you find yourself in the police station the next day. How do you cyberstalk? By using the constitutional freedom of information request instrument to ask for information they're supposed to give back, and that's called cyberstalking. I mean, so those are some of the issues we need to look at. How do you strengthen the civil society? I mean, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, to ensure that they do their job correctly. And I mean, coming back to my constituency, I think there's a lot of capacity development that needs to happen. I think it was also speaking to capital market literacy. I mean, I don't know. I don't think, maybe if you remove Nancy, right? I don't think we have another 20 journalists in Nigeria that can give you like real-time insight or analysis about what is happening in the capital market, right? And you don't also have, and I think this is where we come back to NES and the rest of them. Where is the monthly economic intelligence reports that we should be having from NES? You have a lot of resources, you have a lot of people in the room. No, I mean, I guess when we have the intention, we can start to think of what needs to happen. Because with intention, we can then start to say, what microeconomic data can we start to collect? I mean, we spend a lot of our revenue in our organization just building the technology to collect macroeconomic data. And we're looking for people to partner with. We were coming, we're saying, okay, Nigeria is thinking energy transition, right? It's not even asking itself, where are my dump sites, right? How can I know all the places that we have a dump site so that we can use that to think of recycling, we can use that to think of circular economy, you can use that to start to think of a lot of things. And on my way here, I saw, and we just saying to ourselves, come on, I don't even think if we deployed GoLocal to collect that data, we would ever think of coming this far. That's where the place of artificial intelligence comes. How do we use it to collect the data using socioeconomic satellite imagery and sensor, I mean, I feel like when it comes to data, it becomes, a sad story for a country that claims to be the largest economically in Africa. It's, an hegemony, whether you like it or not, in the region, and, has a lot of, the best of professors you can have in Africa, socioeconomic and the rest of that. I mean, you have them, the couple was just talking about how our diaspora, population are economically viable, right? And if you wanted a real estate investment report today for your diaspora to put their money into, they still go back to unreliable data to make those decisions, right?
I think so much has been said, so much to internalize. So I think I'll put it up to the audience now. It's time for Q&A, but you would agree with me that our fantastic panelists have done justice to the questions that I've posed, as a result of what we're discussing, navigating reform headwinds. Quite a lot, even when Prof was talking, I was saying, how many of us here invested in the stock market, for example? How many of you have shares? Stock? Doctor said you have to have money first. So that goes to what Mr. Oluwafemi was talking about in terms of even literacy, in terms of even communication, in terms of so much to talk about, But I think I'll open it now to the audience. When I talk about Nigerian economy, sometimes I get depressed. I try to detach myself when I get home, from all the shenanigans happening. But we will take 4 questions because after the question and answer, we'll go to unveiling so that we can get that done with. I'll take 2 from this area, okay? I'll take 2 from this area. You people are making this thing difficult for me now, But let's start with 2. Let's start with Professor Ezenweden, MD, DBN.
Let me thank and appreciate our President of NES and Council. They've been doing very well. They've been very innovative in work organizing this conference. Very quickly, 3 points. Walek made a point about coordination. I want to say this. I'm very sympathetic to the idea, very, very sympathetic to that point. But it's not a new idea. As far back as 2002, there was what was called economic and fiscal coordination. Then Central Bank was a member, the DG of Stock Exchange was a member, Minister of Finance was a member, SEC was a member, I think DMO was a member. I think this is the kind of thing you had at work. Maybe it needs to be restructured or restrained in one way or the other. So I thought it's a very important idea, but it's not altogether new. As economists, we say all things being equal, but we know that all things are never equal, and all things will never be equal. You see, all these things we are talking about, there was one point the chairman made: security, and I have not heard much about it. For example, food inflation will continue as long as many of our farmers are in ID camps. Those who go to their farms are shot. Last week, 2 farmers were shot in Delta State. As long as you have the kind of scenario, food inflation will continue because many of our farmers are not going to farms. And the government will, I'm happy DSS, are they going? Are they here? Okay, I'm happy DSS here. Government is doing some, in my own view, government is not doing enough in the area of security. And if we solve the problem of security, 40% of our problem will disappear. Finally, this thing about cash transfer, it promotes corruption. You are not transferring any cash. Because at the end of the day, those intended people don't get the cash. Thank you very much.
He's MD of BBN. Yes.
Again, let me join my voice in appreciating what Ness is doing. A great panelist and great conversation so far. I'll be stuck to see that I couldn't, I don't know, just dashing and data, but I'm pretty sitting there. But my question is straight for the IMF gentleman. And we've heard a lot about these issues around reforms, the policy is good, not good, the impact on that. We talk about evidence-based. Again, IMF has a global view. Can you share with us an experience of a country that had similar kind of situation we find ourselves in and have gone through reforms successfully and have good outcome? What did they do right? What are we not doing? What can we learn from them? I don't know if you have that you can share with us. Thank you.
Well, very good question. Yes, I'm looking forward to what Dr. Becker will say because I've asked him this question before. Okay, let's take 2 more here. Yes. Okay, I just wanted to be passionate. I see Professor Bright's hand up.
Organizing this, just a few points. First is that the question that he asked, the last question he asked, I will say that NES last year, the president of NES made a presentation on that. I remember I was part of that work on that document. And some of the advice I will give is for NES to probably, publicize that document where we looked at a number of countries that have done reforms. One of them is Indonesia, and some of the things Indonesia did that made them to be successful with the structural adjustment program. So that document is available. Maybe it should push that document out, and that is that. I want to also make a comment around the fiscal and monetary policy coordination. I've asked in one of the platforms, and it's a capital market platform, right? And one day this argument was going on, and I said, if we talk about fiscal and monetary policy coordination, what does it mean, right? Because sometimes we just think that just a gathering of the different agencies, and it's beyond that. The theory of that is much more than that. One, there are about 3 criteria for fiscal and monetary policy coordination. So my point is, currently now, we are aware that the government has what we call the economic management team, where both the fiscal side of the government and then the monetary side is also involved, the CBN is involved, and that meeting is going on almost every month. So probably we need to take a look at what is being done there to know whether that is kind of thing you are recommending or not before you can begin to say whether what is working and what is not working, because that is also like the kind of thing you are recommending. I want to just make a point around growth and all of that. All of us know very well, quite well, that if we talk about the inflation that we are talking about and the issue about food insecurity and all of that, if you take a look at your data, you will find out that we've been having this problem for long.
And recent inflation that we have might not really be traced to the insecurity issues of recent time, because insecurity has been there even before the recent inflation trend that we are seeing. So if you take a look at what has really happened, you find out that our production with demand, there has always been a serious gap, even back to before this recent thing. So if you look at the recent thing that has happened, you find out that one of a trigger of our inflation, we have some link with the Ukraine-Russia war, where we have what we call the diesel price moving to almost from 280 to almost 15, right? The second trigger is exchange rate. You and I know that prior to this exchange rate issue, a Toyota Corolla would have never maybe 2-point-something million. Currently it's about 10 million, right? So my point is that sometimes a proper diagnosis of what really has happened will give us some feeler into what is really the issue. So what I'm just saying is to say, we had the monetary authority taking the decision for inflation, to curb inflation by increasing interest rate. One way to take advantage of that is for us to begin to look at how do we optimize, and that brings us to the point you're making around deepening the capital market. How do you optimize public assets, right? That probably currently now we might not even really know their value in the marketplace. And one way to know their value in the marketplace is the capital market. And if the public sector go into equity aspect of some of these kind of public assets, they will help to deepen the capital market. And they will also attract FDI, because when in an high interest rate environment, one way you can stabilize exchange rate is to attract capital. And for you to attract capital, what we attract currently is FPI. We want to attract FDI. But we must have the asset class beyond what the central bank is bringing as instrument, which are short-term instruments. So the public side is going to do something around, optimizing their public assets, taking them into valuing them in the capital. That will have a way of driving FDI that will moderate exchange. And for me and you, for us, I want us to know that if exchange rate could come to some level of stability, we should have some level of impact on stabilizing also on the exchange rate side. On the inflation side. I'm not saying that food insecurity does not really have some impact. It will definitely have some impact, but the key issue is that if we have capital coming in, it will also, attract investment. It will also attract it will also lead to what I call private sector-led growth, both in deepening the capital market and then also help to ensure that we have some level of sustainability that we're talking about. My last point is this: long-term growth is what we are looking at. And if we talk about growth, you and I know that productivity is one of the drivers of growth. This morning I was in a meeting where we're talking about productivity is a major driver of growth. All that we see are short-term distortions. How do we drive productivity? Simple. One is human capital development. What are we doing with human capital development that is relevant to current industrial revolution that is taking place? Today we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution. What is our university doing around that? And what is the financing model that will sustain our university beyond the public funding squeeze that we have? That is one. Second thing is institution. If you trace the Indonesia case, one of the reasons why they were very successful was because Indonesia was having strong institutions beyond some of these reforms. And I think that all of us agree that the reforms are very useful. Reforms are needed. But there are other things that need to be done, and I'm sure that the government is doing a lot. But some things might take some drag. When interest rate goes up, one of the direct effects that it will have impact on import and export. The export side take a lag because there are a lot of things with energy and other that will take place for the manufacturing to be exported. But the import side is immediate, and prices will go up. Okay, so my point is that that institution is critical. But lastly, is capital formation via advanced technology that is needed to tap into all of these sectors to be very efficient. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Mine is just 3 short questions too. I want to take it from what Olufemi said and what Professor Olufemi and Professor Waleke. We've been talking about coordination. I see, if you look at our reforms, some of them are like as the Spirit guides. So it doesn't have any proper route, and therefore, when for instance, I saw when the presentation was being made about is it our hope, the current hope agenda, is it? The renewed hope agenda. I said, how have we been able to
link up the renewable danger with the national development plan we've been worked on. How have we been able to lead? So until we have a reform that links with a national development plan, we will not make that progress. And again, the other thing is about sectoral reforms. And I want to take it from where Unveils stopped. People have been saying, put money in agriculture, put money in agriculture. I have taken time to look at the total factor productivity of Nigerian agriculture from 2016 to 2023. It is less than 1%. And if it is less than 1%, and that is the sector you want to push money to, it will come to what Unveils said. You'll be pushing money into where you'll be pushing money into agriculture, and we're dying of hunger. So how do we navigate that? My last point is, isn't it time, and this question goes to Professor Waleke, isn't it time we have a legislative agenda for national development? Legislative agenda for national development. In other words, let national development objectives be binding on both the federal government, state government, and even local government. That's the only time we can begin to even have a basis for evaluating our policies. Lastly, let us make a difference between economic policy and economic reform. They are two different things. Not all economic policies are economic reforms. Thank you.
Out of it in one piece.
So thank you. I think this is a great question, and I'm glad that it's being asked, especially because there are young students in the room. So I want them really to process this and digest what I'm about to say, right? Example of countries is not the way to approach this. And I will give you some examples, but it's not the way. The way to approach this is where are these countries where we saw true ownership of reforms, where you had national ownership. It's not when you import reform from elsewhere with zero ownership, implementation will fail and you're going to have chaos. So what are these countries where we saw over the years and decades someone standing and saying, I want to transform my country, this is what I will do, and I will build a coalition around me, all the stakeholders in the economy will work with me, and we're going to get this done. One example is India, early in the 1990s. They sat, it was a weekend. The country was going through tough times. The India you see today went through tough times before. They went through tough times, they sat over the weekend, they drafted a blueprint for the reform of India that we see successful today. It was over the weekend. Then they called us to come and review what they did. And they asked us, do you want to support? Yes or no? That's how it is. You start with something on your own. You do the reform with the coalition domestically, with the stakeholder, you interact with everyone. Once you have consensus and stakeholder consultations, then you put it forward and you roll it. Now development partners come and just support your own ideas. Okay, so there is no such a thing where someone will fly in, bring a blueprint for you to implement, and then it works. It doesn't work like that. Okay, so this is India. Second, more recently, Jamaica. For those who maybe haven't followed Jamaica, impressive fiscal consolidation in Jamaica over the past few years. Impressive. I mean, Jamaica was running primary surplus at 7% of GDP. How on earth is that possible in an economy where the government is saving 7% of GDP every year? This is only possible because Jamaica created, before even they start implementing the reform, they created something called an Oversight Economic Reform Committee. That committee included academia, included even religious figures, included civil society organization, private sector, and those were reviewing every single quarters what Jamaica was doing. They were looking at the data. Are we on track on fiscal consolidation? Are we on track on this particular social protection measure? This is what Jamaica did. And it was all a consensus domestically that led to this successful outcome that we saw. Then you have different countries, right? You can see Argentina now. Again, strong ownership, right? The president is doing this and there is strong ownership. He's not counting on anyone else or people abroad to come and say, this is what you have to do. So when we look at countries, example of countries where we have seen reforms and then transformation, at the end of the day, it boils down to national consensus. You need stakeholder consultations. What NES is doing today is exactly that. I'm glad that we have some representative in the room of the administration. We saw this more and more now in Nigeria, right? All these fora where people interact. I was sitting a few days ago at the CBN forum exactly on monetary policy where those things are now discussed in the public domain. So opacity is not good. Ownership is the way to go. And usually when you see success, including the Baltics country, there is no other place in the world where you saw fiscal consolidation like in the Baltics. In the Baltics, during the global financial crisis, it was very, very strong. Again, because of national consensus. If you don't build domestic consensus, the reform implementation cannot advance further.
Okay, so we have some form of agreements in the room. We have to own it. That's the first thing. And not people depending on you and your colleagues in the World Bank to give us something we need to implement here. So, over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much. Very quickly. Well, let me even say, yes, I agree with you, Doctor. It's time we had a legislative agenda for national development. I remember doing an article that was published in Business Day, an article I titled, I think, the risk to the PROGP at the time. I said the major risk to the PROGP at that time was the lack of this legislative agenda. Of course, as the new government came in, it was thrown out. The same fate, unfortunately, is also what is about to befall on the National Development Plan. Very little reference is made to it. The best we hear is that the MTEF is linked to it, but if you look at it in critical terms, you realize that not much is actually taken from that NDP. So I agree with you. Now on the issue of coordination, Professor Reham, let me say that what you have at the moment, you mentioned the economic management team. Yes, that's the government. I'm also aware that there was a time the president set up an economic advisory team, largely the private sector. Okay, so you have the private sector on one side, you also have economic management team, on the other. There is, the danger of a single story is what you find. The private sector, for example, will be making recommendations that only serve their interest. The government is also looking at it from a particular prism. But what I'm recommending is even similar to what Kristen just mentioned, that took place in Jamaica. A broad-based, that's the broad-based, before you can have an economic. I mean, all of these, if you like, councils or committees that have been put in place now, the NES is not represented. Okay, the president of NES, you don't find him in any of these key critical economic, there's conversations. So, and I think there's a gap in that, which is why I'm recommending. I talked about, something like an economic intelligence team. Akin to what we had during the Abacha time. We had Saluko was chair of that economic intelligence team. So we can have that kind of thing, and then have the president of NES, for example, chairing. So we need a broad-based, advisory team, not just exclusively for government or exclusively for the private sector. Finally, on the issue of the market, again, this is long-term growth we are discussing, and long-term growth can only be financed by long-term capital. And where do you get long-term capital? Again, is the capital market, which is why I'm emphasizing the issue of broadening the market, having diversity of broadening the instruments. Today, when we borrow, what instrument do we use in borrow? Left or right? Top way, right? Top way. Yes, you're one of the, when you're presenting, of course, in the report there, we are talking about the rising fiscal deficit, and you said, it's a threat. I agree, it's a threat, but it's only a threat, it's also conditional. Okay? For me, I don't see anything wrong in borrowing, but it also depends on what you do with the money. So if you borrow and you apply them to productive, yes, it may not trigger inflation. And that's why I'm concerned about the instruments we use in borrowing when we borrow. Recently, the government, if you notice, for some time, they've been borrowing using FGM bonds. When you use FGM bonds to borrow, the moment the proceeds come, the government can use them for anything. So they have discretionary features. But when you use specific instruments like the sukuk, you know that the proceeds will be tied to particular projects. And that's why we are recommending that going forward, government should use more of infrastructure bonds when they want to borrow long term from the market, and not just general obligation bonds, FGM bonds. So we advocate the use of infrastructure bonds. We advocate the use of green bonds, blue bonds. Okay, these sustainable instruments, they are project tied. So as soon as the money comes, you are sure of where the money is going. So for me, that's the way to go, especially given our current debt situation. If we have to borrow, we should ensure that the money is tied to self-liquidating projects. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Bushman, you had a question?
I mean, the way I captured the question, I probably would, divert a little bit in the way I answer it, and maybe just to speak a little bit to the pain that made us start terrified in the first place, which is for every reform, whether at subnational or national level, or even when you're looking at the intersection of external and internal factors, first thing is, where's the data insight that is driving the next decision you want to make, right? So, as simple as, where's the map of all the post offices in Nigeria if we wanted to take food from the farm gate to the ports? NIPOST collects certain amount of cash. Every time you do a cash transfer, a certain amount goes to NIPOST, but you don't even have the map. I'll be so surprised if DSS can tell me that they have a map in their office where they're spotting the security hotspot in the country. And if they say yes, how is that informing the defense budget? So basic data-driven, decision making, whether at school, whatever we call it, I think is very important for whichever we want to answer this. The other would be all the data that we have, right? What decision are we making with it in terms of policy communication? How are we using it to create models? If we're talking long term, I mean, I'm wondering, I know that CBN probably will have this. I don't know whether we have something like that at the budget and planning, unit. Do you have like economic models that says with all these things being equal, like Prof said, it can never be equal, right? But if certain, variables were equal, this is what we'll get, and that's what will inform what component or what should be the constituent of your infrastructural, bonds. What should be in your grain, right? Should you be going into that, grain bond or grain, capital, going to capital market for a green economy, based on, do you want to do it for the construction industry? Because that's where, the top stock exchange guys have. If you have Dangote cement, it says something about the fact that Nigerians build in certain ways. What is I just feel like when everybody comes to the table, whether it is at the CBN monthly meeting, whether it is at the, when the MT, EF or anything is done, or even when the legislators want to provide any oversight, right? The question should be, what driver is driving this? If you said you're putting X billion naira into the technology, I see 3 MTT, 5 CCC. What? Okay, so if you put X million into 3 million people, do you have their tax proceeds? Do you have their revenue proceeds to be able to tax it so that you know that when you put this amount into 23 million Nigerians, they will make this amount of dollars, and then you're going to tax them this way? Almost all your almost all our what do you call the remote technologies in Nigeria don't pay tax. They collect the dollars and keep it for every other use. That's why you see some of these buildings, people buying things because the people who own the money don't pay tax. And your tax is very retrogressive in the way you think of your tax revenue. Sorry.
Yes, thank Thank you very much. Dr. Mahmoud will come in here, but you said something very fantastic, because I think even the top 5% of those that pay taxes, I think the rich people, the richest people in the country, we don't have many of them paying taxes. The bulk of the people that pay taxes are those of us here in the room.
Information.
Yeah.
The bulk of companies' income tax comes from the large companies that are listed on the exchange. Yes, the Dangote Cement, MTN, are the ones that pay the largest, and that's why we are saying let more companies come, because if more companies come, their books are open and they can't evade tax.
It's individuals, yes. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. If you are able to, I'm following Joshua's point, if you are able to capture the informal sector, 20% of the informal sector will pay more than the largest 10, the 60 largest market capitalization of the stock exchange. The informal sector, I don't know, MBS is here, is still close to 60% of the economy, which for so long. If you're able to capture that granular influence, it's more than Dangote and Boa combined. So what he's saying is very important, that we get to capture that, and people evade the formal sector because of taxes. So if we can, use, even if it's AI, even if it's an example of post office again was very, very unique, get those group of people to pay, even though they are paying 1,000, and you get it over 200 million or 100 million people. It's a lot. So the more we formalize, the informal sector and bring them into the mainstream, the more revenue we'll get, and we'll be able to explain why, as we remove subsidy, we don't need to tax people more. Because if you remove subsidy and you're still taxing people more to get more, so where is the subsidy going? So, well, that is not the point I wanted to make. I wanted to speak on the coordination. Now, I played a major part in this while I was a civil servant. The mistake we always make is we tie fiscal and monetary policy coordination to individuals and institutions, but it's supposed to be to the system. One conflict we commonly have is that, and I like what Dr. Uche said, if we can legislate a policy agenda, and I think Professor Walepe also mentioned that, we should have a common goal. That is Nigerian economy. Fiscal and monetary policy are a component of the economy. So if you have a common goal, and that's why a central bank, I don't know where you guys are on inflation targeting, there must be a lead. Finance will come, which is the executive arm now, will come and say we want inflation 20%, unemployment 10%, GDP growth rate of this. And then central bank policies should key into this global objective. Central bank should not have an independent policy or independent objective. You don't say that, oh no, if government is going to spend, no, I'm going to tighten. It's conflicting. So if government is going to spend, that is the rule. Central bank should take a cue and work towards supporting government to spend. You can't say, no, my policy is that I must bring inflation down. No. You have a common objective as a nation, as an economy. So if we have that, because now, Prof, if you said, okay, these guys are not there, if you do that act or whatever committee, legislature will tell you that Senate has to be there. NLC will tell you that they have to be in that coordination committee. Civil society. So it's not about those individuals. If we have a common goal, and we should be accountable to that goal, that you achieve this as a government, not that, oh, central bank governor, you succeeded, the exchange rate is stable. But Minister of Economy, you didn't get growth. No. There should be a common goal, and everybody should key into that common goal. So not, central bank independence does not mean political independence. It's policy independence, but that independent policy must support the federal government. Oh, yes, national policy. Thank you very much.
Yes, so this is getting very interesting now.
We're just getting started. So my brother Hassan just talked about his view, how we can think about or design the coordination mechanism for development. I will still stand by the view that, when you have fewer instruments, it's better to have fewer objectives, right? This is a simple Tinbergen type of problem, and I think most of the professors here know what I'm talking about. You have the central bank saying we're moving towards inflation targeting because the tools that we have are closer to that objective than if we decide to have other objectives. This is also a country where, you know, we saw the central bank getting into many stuff with limited productivity, limited impact. Again, it's not that I'm saying, you know, that we should not have a conversation about what other objectives central bank can have. In other countries, central bank are also in charge of financial stability. They're in charge of even, you know, what they call growth, right? If you know the Taylor rule, the Taylor rule has inflation and growth in there, right? But I think in a country where you're still trying to restore credibility, restore trust, and restore stability, it's better to have all your instruments guided, at least in the interim, towards one key objective, which is macro stability. At this particular point in time, the ultimate tax that Nigerians pay is inflation. Inflation is driving the Naira exchange rate. Inflation is driving food insecurity. Inflation is driving, you know, many other aspects of the economy. High interest rate is because of inflation. The monster that needs to be addressed or fought today is inflation. And the central bank, using all the firepower it has to bring this inflation down to normal level, is a pro-poor policy when you look at it. Now, all the quasi-fiscal operations that you think of, should the central bank finance health because health is good for growth? Should the central bank help finance real estate because it's good for social protection? I don't really think that this should be the mandate or the instrument that we have for a normal or modern central bank are the right one to achieve those objectives. What I would say is, this is fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is about stabilization, about redistribution and allocation. We know these three functions of fiscal policy, right? We know them. So when we think about recap of Bank of Agriculture, recap of Bank of Industry, this is the right approach. As the central bank is diverting away from those sectors, what are the instrument that will now be used to replace the central bank in this role? And I'm very happy that consideration is given to what are we going to do with Bank of Industry? What are we going to do with Bank of Agriculture? Having multiple objectives and limited instruments is a recipe for disaster. We have seen it before, including in this country. It never worked. It didn't work. Let me stop here.
Okay. Please, a round of applause for our panelists and good for you. And it's time for our unveiling now. I think this is another highlight of the day. Okay, Prof, you want to say something?
Thank you so very much. I mean, if I can stay here the whole day, because there are just very interesting things to just discuss. And I like the perspective that Christian brought in and all those other things. Very excellent discussions. So once again, let's put our hands together for them. And also for the moderator. So we have some certificates we want to give them. Some so that we don't have money. You see, that's the thing. You see, an opponent IMF will not give us money. They only give government money. You see, that's the thing. You see, if you give us money to check the government, you will also be helpful. Because this government just call, they take money and they spend it. We that are supposed to check them and analyze what they are doing, we don't have the ability to do that. You know, one of the things I've mentioned, and I also believe also, is that it is important that we have a team in government that can look at impact of policies 10 years, 5 years down the line. Okay? And that will also be able to either, advise both the government itself and also let the legislator also know that whatever decision you are making, what are the impact of these policies, the medium and the long term of the country. We don't have that now. So like he said, government just takes some policy from somewhere and implement. We are not doing pre-analysis, okay, post and what's it called now? The pre that we do.
to look at what are the possible impacts of these policies. What sectors are going to be impacted? What economic areas are going to be impacted? What do you have in terms of, pushing the effects, to moderate the impact? Those are not those. Don't roll out policies and everybody runs with it. I think that is very important. And I also told the legislature when I was in the Senate, they should also have their own body. Experts that will be able to analyze for government and double check on the government. They don't take anything they bring and accept, every dollar you are going to borrow, what are the metrics of impacts, of outcomes that we expect out of those dollars, But that's only that. So, sir, we are going to help us, sir. So, Mahmoud Hassan.
On behalf of the Nigerian Islamic Society, we are making a presentation. We are making this presentation to you for your excellent contribution.
Dr. Christian, thank you, please.
On behalf of the Nigerian Islamic Society, we are presenting this certificate to you for your excellent presentation.
Dr. Professor Wale, please.
For your excellent presentations, on behalf of the Nigerian Islamic Society, we are giving you this certificate.
Nancy Naji. Excellent operation.
Nancy, for your excellent operation, on behalf of the Nigerian Islamic Society, we are giving you this certificate.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Dr. Chukwuka, on behalf of the Nigerian Islamic Society, we are presenting this certificate to you for your contribution and excellent presentation.
Mr. Joshua Olufemi.
Joshua, on behalf of the Nigerian Islamic Society, we are giving you this certificate for your excellent presentation and participation in this conference.
N E S. Yes. Please, a round of applause for Nigerian Economic Society for this momentous unveiling. So, ladies and gentlemen, we now have the 2025 Economic Report of the Nigerian Economic Society, a roadmap to navigating our economic landscape with informed policy choices.
Yeah, where the outlook provides analysis of the economy, I also look at the various challenges that Nigeria may have in 2025. What are the upsides? What are the risks that we look at? And then what Nigeria can do to navigate those risks. The conclusion we have from the report is that we are, we're a little bit optimistic, but we are very careful. There are a lot of opportunities that the country has, but there are also a whole lot of challenges. And we are aware of the fact that, yes, we have all of these reforms, which will look at growth, efficiency, but we then look at the other side, which is the impact on human beings. We are worried, that the policies of government may not be directly addressing some of the economic, difficulties that Nigerians are facing. Definitely with the policies in place in the last 2 years, inflation had gone up significantly. We have exchange rate volatility. We have a lot of, contractions in real income, and the average Nigerians are finding it very difficult, in the words of the president, to breathe. So it is very incumbent that the government comes in and find a way of cushioning the effects on the people, so that people will also be able to buy in, into those policies. And they will also know that whatever sacrifice they are making now, those sacrifices are short-term in nature, one of the discussants mentioned that communication is very important. I think there is a lack of effective communication to Nigerians as to why we are doing these reforms. These are the effects that it's going to have. This is when we are going to get out of the reforms, and the benefits of what we are doing now, of what, for instance, studies that have been removed. How much has government realized from that? What are those, those income that the additional income, where are they applying the incomes? Which sectors, And how are they also trying to, mitigate the effects of, on the poor and the vulnerable? We don't have much of that. So there's the issue of communication, and also the government needs to also see how, the vulnerable people, the poor people who are being affected by these policies, the effects are cushioned on them. And that is very important, because you see, you have government coming 4 years, 8 years, implement some policies, and when they leave, another policy come in, and in fact, the first of 2 years, they try to do what the other previous government have done, and then they started again. By the time they try to, get to some level, they leave, another people come in. So you have this, you don't have a continuous, development, and that is not good for long-term growth also, development of the country. So each country would normally have what we call development plan, or even, a strategic, a long-term plan that may even have about 25, 30 years, Then you need to then have a situation where budgets and policies are, all of them are geared towards achieving that long-term objectives. Now, what we have in Nigeria is not that. This current government has implemented its own policies, renew hope agenda. How does that fit into long-term goal of this country? The previous government had its own, they have 50 years plan. This current plan, how do they fit into that? Another government will come in when this one leaves, and then they start again. So we think it's very important that we have a way of legislating this, that every government will be bound, into, a long-term agreed goals of where we're to go. Now they will define in terms of what they need to do to get there. But all of us will have, some agreement as to where, a consensus as to where we want to be. Thank you very much.
I don't really stop him from going. He said you should come.